Hi there Waltoneers, I'm Jack and this is DSNY Newscast, and today we have some major breaking news regarding Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress at the Magic Kingdom. As to begin with, we have the closure date for this attraction. It's going to be closing on July 5th of this year and then reopening at some point in 2027. And so that means that your last chance to experience this current version of Carousel of Progress is going to be that July 5th, as on July 6th it will be closed and reopening at some point next year, which also incidentally is the 60th anniversary of this attraction debuting within a Disney park in 1967. And as you can probably tell from what I've said so far, this is going to be more than just a routine refurbishment. Instead, this is actually going to be the most significant update to this attraction since its inception, as every single scene within the attraction is going to be reimagined and revamped for this new version of Carousel of Progress. Now, I know how that sounds. Before we will start jumping to conclusions here, I've seen the presentation and heard what Imagineering are going to be working on with this project. And if my opinion carries any weight whatsoever after all these years of covering Disney park projects, I've got to tell you, I have very high confidence in this project, and I love Carousel of Progress. It's one of those attractions which I say time and time again, it is one of my favourite attractions, and it's one I hold near and dear to my heart. So to see them making changes to Carousel of Progress and hearing that to begin with, I won't lie to you, it is something which had me a bit trepidatious to begin with, but after hearing what they're doing with this whole project, this is going to be fantastic. They're going to be doing a lot of what I wanted them to do with this attraction when I speculated about how they could update Carousel of Progress. And I just want to address some of the overarching questions that you probably got immediately after hearing this news. So it's going to be the same family. It's going to be the Progress family that we all know at the moment. John, Sarah, Jimmy, Patricia, Uncle Orville, Grandma, Grandpa, Rover, they're all going to be within the attraction, the same cast of characters within Carousel of Progress. And yes, the Carousel of Progress Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow theme song will be within this attraction as the connected theme song between the scenes. So it's not going to be another one of those situations like they had in the 1970s when they switched out the song to Best Time of Your Life. Instead, this is going to keep the Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow theme song within the attraction. But the big thing here that's changing is that it's not just updating the scenes within the existing decades that we know of, 1900s, 1920s, and 1940s. Instead, all of the show scenes are going to be getting new decades. They're going to be turning the dial on the decades. And each one of the scenes is going to be representing an entirely new decade that's not currently within the attraction. And so what these new decades are going to be is the 1960s, the 1980s, and then the late 1990s into 2000s with Y2K, and then the finale scene is going to be set very far off into the distant future. And so that's the headline news here, but we have a lot more details regarding these decades which I want to get to. But before we do that, the other thing I want to talk about here is the rationale behind updating this attraction at this point, because if you think about it, the original Carousel of Progress that debuted in 1964, with that attraction, you had people attending the World's Fair who will remember 1900s America. They'll remember the electrification of America with the electric light bulb and things like that, and they would remember all of those things, and they'll be nostalgic for the early 1900s. But if you think about it now, even the oldest grandparents visiting the Magic Kingdom to go on Carousel of Progress, very few will have been born in the 1920s and visiting Magic Kingdom, because there'd be nearly 100, and certainly no one in the early 1900s. So they're shifting the timeline here to make it more relevant and resonate with a new audience. And after all, what was said about Carousel of Progress is that Walt Disney was a master of telling stories through nostalgia. And I feel like Walt Disney, if he was around today, would probably be one of the strongest advocates for updating it to make it more relevant for the current audience here and build upon that nostalgia that people have for these different decades. And speaking of Walt Disney, it was last year at Destination D23 when it was announced that Walt Disney would be coming to Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress in audio-animatronic form, and we've now had it confirmed that Walt Disney will be the introduction to the attraction, the intro scene for Carousel of Progress. So Walt Disney, as you can see in the artwork here, he's going to be dressed in his iconic blue cardigan or sweater, whichever one you want to call it, from the 1964 TV episode titled Disneyland Goes to the World's Fair. And in this show, he spoke all about the different things that the Disney Company were bringing to the World's Fair. But most importantly, he also spoke about Carousel of Progress and talked the audience through what Carousel of Progress was going to be. And so this is just me speculating here, but they're probably going to be using the audio from that episode, cleaning it up, that great audio recording they've got there, and using that as the introduction spiel for this attraction. And hopefully it will blend seamlessly into that first scene, because they do actually have Walt Disney singing Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. I don't know if I'll be able to isolate his voice from when he sang with the Sherman Brothers, but either way, it'll be great to see that scene blended into the first scene of the attraction here. But before we dive into all of the details about the new decades here, I just want to say a quick thanks to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Monarch Money. Now, if you're watching this video today, there's probably a good chance that you're planning a trip to Disney in the next year or so, and with the way the world is right now, with high inflation, high gas prices, high cost of living, sitting down and trying to figure out a way to save for your next Disney vacation can be overwhelming, and that's where Monarch Money comes into all of this, as Monarch is a private, ad-free personal finance platform that syncs with over 13,000 institutions through a fast and secure setup with all major banks, credit cards and brokerages. And because it is ad-free, it means that you are a customer to Monarch and not the product here. And so instead of jumping between 5 different banking apps or staring despairingly at a spreadsheet, with Monarch you can see all your accounts, spending, reoccurring bills, and even your net worth and progress on paying off debt all in one easy to understand dashboard, synced across platform on both mobile and desktop. And it's not just a matter of showing you where your money went, but with AI powered insights, it helps you make more informed financial decisions. When it comes to the planning and the budgeting to make a Disney vacation happen, it oftentimes falls all upon one person to manage it all. But with Couples View, it means you're both looking at the exact same financial picture, where you can separate fixed expenses from flexible spending, set custom categories and rules, and keep you focused on the end goal of getting on vacation. Check out Monarch Money for yourself today, and if you use my link in the description box, you can get 50% off your first year with Monarch Money with code DSNY50. Now let's talk about the new decades that will be represented here, as Scene 1, which is currently set within the early 1900s, is going to be set within the 1960s, and it's going to pick up from the World's Fair in the 1960s and have John sat in the kitchen, a coffee mug in hand, talking about all of the innovations that they saw at the World's Fair and how those innovations most likely are making their way into the modern home of the 60s, with all of the appliances probably coming to life like they do currently in the attraction. And the reason why John is sat there with coffee mug in hand isn't because it's morning, it's because it's nighttime, and the whole family have been staying up late because it's the night of the Apollo 11 moon landing. And the way we know this is because it was mentioned that Jimmy will be on one of the side stages on the turntables there, and he'll be sat in front of the TV waiting for the broadcast to begin of the Apollo 11 moon landing. And so the whole family's been waiting to see man step foot on the moon there. And I'm guessing there'll be some dialogue of John talking about how the human race has made it into outer space and it's a great big beautiful tomorrow and a progress for mankind and all that sort of stuff. So great little moment there. We do know that it's going to be the night of the moon landing, so we can also say that it's going to be July 20th, 1969. At least we can infer that from it being the moon landing. So that's Scene 1, 1960s. And then in Scene 2, we flip forward 15 years into the future, and it's Halloween night in the mid-1980s. But this will actually see Sarah sat on the main stage, the mother character, in the kitchen, holding court, talking to us for once instead of John on the main stage, which is also showcasing, the progression of women in the 1980s. And Sarah's going to be dressed in full 1980s attire, big hair, shoulder pads, all of that stuff for the 1980s look there. And this scene's going to be full of 1980s pop culture references, but also a lot of Disney Easter eggs as well. And then it was confirmed that on one of the side stages in this scene, they're going to have the teenage daughter Patricia in her bedroom with posters on the wall and all that sort of stuff, and it's going to be a very 1980s bedroom there. And then on another one of the side stages, we're going to have Uncle Orville and he's going to be sat in a bathtub again, and it's probably going to be a very 1980s looking bathtub. And Imagineering described that Uncle Orville has apparently invested all of his life savings into a company called Apple, and there'll probably be a few jokes about, you know, oh, that will never work or something like that. And Uncle Orville will get the last laugh here, and he's actually going to turn off the lights in the scene with a clapper switch, which is very 1980s technology there. And they'll have the iconic line,
"No privacy at all around this place,"
keeping so much of the attraction's iconic lines going throughout this new version of Carousel of Progress here. Then in scene 3 we flip forward another 15 years and it's Y2K. And it's going to be the dawn of the new millennium and the turn of the century, a different type of turn of the century. And again, it's another reference back to the current version of the attraction. The first scene of Carousel of Progress at the moment is early 1900s and is referenced as turn of the century America, and this scene in scene 3, Y2K, is another turn of the century America scene here. So it's great to see how they're bringing this all together and tying it all into this kind of continuity of the attraction here. But this will see John sat back on the main stage again, talking about the dawn of the internet and maybe even the Y2K bug. I think he might reference that. That's just my own personal speculation here. And maybe even wireless internet and all that sort of stuff. But John is sat on the main stage here and he's got a laptop in front of him. So nice big chunky laptop, most likely. And this is going to be counting down to the new millennium. And so it's New Year's Eve 1999. And the way we know this is because on one of the side stages it was mentioned that Grandma and Grandpa will be sat there in front of the TV counting down to the new year. And Grandma then apparently flips the switch to pro wrestling to get her pro wrestling fix. So she's a fan of pro wrestling in this new version of Carousel of Progress. And from what I saw with the artwork at the time, it looked like it was The Rock delivering the people's elbow. So WWF circa 1999. And I hope they have the right clip of The Rock from 1999 there to really set it correctly in place for this New Year's Eve scene here. And this is a great integration here because in actual fact there's a lot of crossover between wrestling fans and Disney fans, and I'm one of them. I have been watching WWE since around that time, the year 2000, so been watching it for a long time, and to see that crossover within Carousel of Progress, again, I love to see that running gag continue in this attraction here. And then also within this scene, there's going to be a lot of the single-use appliances within the kitchen that are very reminiscent of 2000s America. So you're going to see stuff like popcorn makers, bread makers, blenders, coffee makers within the kitchen that are going to come to life in that classic Carousel of Progress way there. And apparently Imagineers have been rummaging through their attics and their lofts for different memorabilia and artifacts from not only the 80s but also this time period in the 2000s to add to each one of these scenes. And they're also sourcing a lot of stuff off eBay as well to really make this an authentic environment for each one of these show scenes here. But there might also be a Disney pin collection within one of the scenes, but there's going to be lots of Disney references, which I think people are going to love. And then in scene 4 we fast forward very far off into the distant future here, and we haven't got the exact year, but Imagineering did describe that the Progress family in this scene will be off planet. They'll be on a different planet altogether from Earth. So a great little nod there to other iconic attractions. I think it's a great little reminiscent nod to Horizons, and I think a lot of people will love that who loved Horizons with this final scene of the attraction. And it also creates a beautiful narrative arc for Carousel of Progress. So you got scene 1, 1960s Night of the Moon landing, and mankind making it into outer space and landing on the moon, and then in the final scene the Progress family themselves are on a different planet. So it creates a beautiful narrative arc within the attraction here. And, you know, the human race has become an interplanetary species. So set very far off into the future. And looking at this artwork, there's something I want to make a note of here, as with this being the finale scene, we know that the main stage is going to be open, which means that there's not going to be any additional scenes taking place on the side stages within the turntables. And I say this because, as we can see, the Grandma and Grandpa characters are going to be on the left-hand side, and they seem to be entering through a door. And obviously this is just my own speculation here, but I think it would truly be a wow moment if Imagineering managed to get these animatronic characters to look like they're walking onto stage. And the reason why I say that is because there looks to be a planter that will be blocking the feet of the animatronics. So potentially they could have some sort of dolly system bring those animatronics onto stage for the finale scene. And the set design for this final scene is apparently drawing inspiration from a piece of artwork by legendary Imagineer John Hench. And I've looked at some artwork and I think it's drawing inspiration on this piece of artwork here. So this whole new update is so rich in terms of paying homage to, you know, Disney legends like John Hench, but also different references to past iterations of Carousel of Progress, keeping all the same classic tropes, jokes, gags within the attraction, and it's the same family, same theme song. So as you can tell, now you've heard it all, I'm very optimistic about what they're going to do with Carousel of Progress, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on this down below in the comment section. And personally speaking, these exact decades are ones which I've previously said I would love to see within a new version of Carousel of Progress if they were to update the entire attraction. As back in 2018 I did a video talking about how it was about time we get an audio animatronic Walt Disney, and where I would have put a Walt Disney animatronic would have been within the Carousel of Progress, introducing Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress. It would have made perfect sense, and lo and behold, they're doing that. But also at the time I mentioned how Rob Plays from Midway to Main Street had also pitched the idea of having these exact decades within the attraction as well, with 1960s and the moon landing, 1970s, 80s with the dawn of personal computing, and then you've got 1990s into 2000s with the dawn of the internet, and that would have been a nice way to frame the show. And so it's great to see that Imagineering came to the same conclusion here with this update. And so to see them change from 1900s, 1920s, 1940s to these new scenes and new decades, I think it makes complete sense, because after all, most grandparents visiting Magic Kingdom now, a lot of them will be born in 40s, 50s or 60s, and they will all have memories of the moon landing, and so they'll be reminiscing about that in the first scene. But then also the 1980s and Y2K, you're really pulling in the nostalgia factor for younger generations, and so you got Gen X who will really remember 1980s extremely well, and then you got millennials who will really remember the millennium and Y2K extremely well as well. And so it builds that nostalgia and storytelling for all different generations for this new version of Carousel of Progress. And then we come to the speculation part of this whole thing, because if you're going to have new scenes and you're going to have a new script, you're going to need a new voice cast, because the current voice of John in the 1994 version is voiced by Gene Shepherd, who died in 1999, and also the Grandpa character in the current version is voiced by Rex Allen, who was actually the original voice of John in the 1964 and 67 versions of the attraction, and he also died in 1999. And so, you know, you're going to need a whole new voice cast for these characters here, and it'll be very interesting to see who they cast as the main character of John. I think that they might pull from some Disney alumni voice actors. I would speculate that Alan Tudyk is probably in the running here for the voice actor of John, because he's voiced so many characters for the Walt Disney Company and carries some weight to his name being tied to the project. You could go in a completely different direction, have Patrick Warburton. He's got an iconic voice, but maybe it's a bit too iconic for this attraction in particular. Or you could go for a voice actor from the Disney parks, such as Corey Burton, who is a voice actor in many of our attractions already, such as the ghost host for the Haunted Mansion Holiday, and he's also some of the pirates' voices within Pirates of the Caribbean as well, when that had its update. But I also want to throw it over to you in the comment section, because I'd love to hear your suggestions for who you would like to see voice these characters within this new version of Carousel of Progress. Then the other thing to mention here is the possibility of new animatronics within this attraction. Now, Imagineering said that the animatronic characters will be refreshed for this version of Carousel of Progress. Now, when they did the Country Bear Jamboree, they took the existing animatronic figures and they gave them some new internals and refreshed the animatronics themselves, and now they're working fantastic within that attraction. So it could be that they're going to be doing the same with the Progress family and using the existing animatronic figures and just refreshing the internal components to make them work even better than before. Because when it debuted in 1994, the current version, it had a lot more movement in the animatronic figures, and they could bring a lot more of that stuff back within the figures themselves. But personally, I would like to see advancements from the latest all-electric animatronics come to these figures, because the fluidity of movement within the latest generation of animatronics is unrivaled. And if you're going to have the Walt Disney animatronic figure on stage be the most advanced humanoid animatronic that they've ever made, it might be a bit jarring to go from that first intro scene to then the first scene of the attraction not seeing that same level of fluidity of movement and lifelike movements with the rest of the family within the attraction itself. But it'll be interesting to see what they do there. I think it's going to be all the same face molds for the animatronic figure, so all the characters will look like the characters we know from Carousel of Progress. And I also think we're going to see some show set improvements as well. So, you know, the scrims that are acting as walls within the side turntables of the attraction, they have kind of warped and stretched over time and faded, and they're not as convincing as walls within this show scene anymore. So to see that kind of stuff get updated as well will be a big deal for the overall look of the attraction. And it'll be interesting to see in terms of special effects. They're going to be using old school practical special effects within the attraction still. But then the other thing I want to mention here is that this is just one more step along the way in what is basically an unannounced Tomorrowland revamp at the Magic Kingdom. As we had the People Mover get its new narration track of Aurok 5 in 2022, and Tron Light Cycle Run arrived in 2023 within Tomorrowland. Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spins just had a huge upgrade to the interactive targets, the blasters and all the gameplay within that attraction that opened very recently. And now we're getting the Carousel of Progress update as well. And so this is basically a unannounced Tomorrowland revamp within Magic Kingdom. And if we're looking at other things which I think we need to keep an eye on for future projects to be announced, Space Mountain is top of that list. It opened in 1975 and it's now 51 years old. And roller coasters tend to need to be retracked every 45 to 50 years, so it would make sense for Space Mountain to need a retracking. And after all, we've just seen Big Thunder Mountain reopening following its retracking of its roller coaster system there, and that attraction opened in 1980, so that was 45 years old and that got retracked by comparison, whereas Space Mountain is even older and hasn't been retracked. So I think they know they need to, you know, update Space Mountain with a new track here, but it's going to be a very difficult, long project to do because it's such a unique building to actually open up and get that roller coaster track inside. So it'll be a difficult one, but I do think they do need to do something with Space Mountain in the not so distant future, and we might be expecting some sort of announcement about that fairly shortly on Space Mountain. If they're doing that, maybe we'll see some story changes to the attraction as well. I previously said that I would love to see Wall-E within Space Mountain. I think that'd be a great IP integration there, and we're kind of doing the dance around in space with Wall-E and Eve from that Pixar movie, but that's just one way that you could tie an IP to something like Space Mountain and make it more marketable beyond what Space Mountain already is. Because also the other thing is that they lowered the height requirement with Big Thunder Mountain to 38 inches, and could they do the same with Space Mountain? If they were to put a whole new track in there, it would be a lot more of a smooth ride for the attraction itself. And then you've got Tron right next door, which has a much higher height requirement, and so you've got even more roller coasters that the little ones can experience there. But anyway, with that being said for today, now it's over to you, the Waltoneers, as I would like to know, what are your thoughts and opinions about this new version of Carousel of Progress coming to Magic Kingdom in 2027? What would you like to see referenced within the scenes themselves? And also, what would be the voice actors that you would like to see voice the characters within this new Carousel of Progress? And of course, if you're new to this channel, be sure to subscribe down below, hit the notification bell, and check out the rest of the videos on this channel as well. And I'd also like to say a massive thank you to the official Waltoneer Club over on Patreon for always supporting this channel. It's greatly appreciated. And also a huge shout out to the Waltoneer Gold members that you can see here on the screen right now, as well as Waltoneer Diamond members JC Russell, Justin Tupper, and Tim and Stephen Parsons. And with that being said for today, I've been Jack, you've been you, and I'll see you real soon.